Thanks for having me today. So what I'm going to talk about here today is granted fire cert, which is why I underlined it. This is going to be what I'm going to call a non-writing presentation. You don't need to take any notes. It's going to all be fairly high level. I am not going to talk about how to do a fire cert. I'm not going to talk about what should be in a fire cert. I'm going to talk about using them and why people should think about them a bit more than maybe they should have. So topics I am going to cover are, first, just as an introduction, I'm going to do just as a description of what do I do with fire certs. I'm very briefly going to just re-examine what actually is a fire cert, why you need it, but what actually is it? And are we thinking about them the right way? Then what happens after the fire cert is granted? And then I'm going to talk about using fire certs for designers, assigned certifiers, and building control officers. Maybe get them to think about, am I using fire certs the right way? Am I paying enough attention to them? So first off, my work with fire certs. I've been a building control officer since 2003, and hands up disclosure, in that time I have done one fire cert. Now, in my defense, it was handwritten and it went downhill from there. So I think that kind of covers me for a while. I have done 544 access certs, if that counts for anything. And while I haven't processed fire certs, what I have been doing for the last 20 years is I have taken the fire cert and gone out and done an inspection of the building to see did it comply with the fire cert and did it comply with the building regulations. And by a rough count, I reckon I've gone into about 200 of them. Everything from a small toilet block right up to Cork Airport. And currently on my desk, I have 19 fire certed buildings that I'm inspecting. 9 of them, what I would call desktop inspections. I've written out to the consultants based on, what came in with maybe the commencement notice or the 7-day notice, and I have another 10 of them where I have gone out and done site inspections. So one of the main kind of buildings that I wind up inspecting, I've inspected every type, but in the main, apartment blocks, schools, and nursing homes. The apartment blocks, one of the reasons I went to there is that there's a significant consequence of non-compliance. Not only is there the life safety thing, but say like Priory Hall, where mistakes are made, it winds up costing a fortune to fix if you can't fix them at all. Schools, I've done quite a lot of them. I know it's been said to me that, why are you inspecting schools? Because it's, assigned certifiers looking after them. And I'll give you 3 letters, WBS, Western Building Systems. I'm part of why I go there. There's a lot of people going into the school. There's a lot of young kids going into the schools. There's a lot of communities using the school afterwards. The government is paying for the school to be built, so we may as well check it. And the last one I go to is nursing homes. You're dealing with a lot of vulnerable people. And also an important thing is the Cork County Council took a decision years ago that we were going to do inspections of all the new nursing homes before they opened, just to make sure they complied. So my boss, Earl Ryan, a couple of years ago said, Martin, go out and inspect them from the start, so that when the dedicated fire officer goes out at completion search stage or at opening stage, hopefully then they'll find no problems. That's not the time to find out that they didn't put the fire main in. And a couple of reasons for doing it is, look, it benefits many people going inspecting commercial buildings. It's more interesting in houses. I'm sick of inspecting houses. It's kind of the same 50 problems a lot of the time. And it really expands your brain. So any building control people here who don't inspect commercial buildings, part of the presentation is here today is to try and encourage you to maybe think about going and doing them, because they're far more interesting. And I suppose the last reason then is there's a much greater consequences if anything does go wrong. Just some examples just off of the major issues I found this year alone. I got a school extension. They put on, I'm guessing, 150 meter squared semi-basement that was never mentioned in the fire cert. That one, could go to enforcement. I had an apartment block. There was 2 smoke control shafts, a meter squared each, that were supposed to have gone in. When the fire cert came in, they weren't on it. The fire officer, for various reasons, insisted that they do go on the fire cert, and predictably enough, when they started building, they were missing. So that site has been sitting there for 9 months. nothing happening, delayed until the developers can figure out what they're going to do, because they now don't have room to put in the smoke control shafts. I have a nursing home. They put in about 100 and something meters squared of timber linings on the ceiling, and 3 days later they had to take it all back down again, which costs a lot of money. Just highlights, it was clearly written in the fire cert, no timber linings, and they put timber linings in anyway. I had a 2-story creche. They've put in large inner rooms up on the first floor that weren't on the fire cert. I've caught that one early. Hopefully that's not too bad. I had a storage building. They were required to put insulated cladding at one end of the building, and they put in standard cladding. And about 3 weeks after they put it all up, they had to take it all back down again. And I think there was a couple of 100 meters squared of that. They thought they could change it because they weren't in a boundary condition, but they had forgotten the fact that the reason the fire officer put the insulated cladding in is because there was a lot of high-level machines and access hatches up on the top level, and there was an external escape stairs coming down. So the insulated cladding was to cover that. The designer thought he was okay to change it, deviated from the fire cert, and had to undo the whole lot. At a community hall, it wasn't actually the designer, it was the owner was the one causing the trouble. They kept changing the design. In fact, they changed it so often, I wound up getting 2 revised fire certs, not just one. And then I had another one. It was a school, they putting on an extension, and they found they were forming a new corridor. They were supposed to put in fire-rated insulated glazing, and they had left the old glazing, and that was on the main escape corridor out of the school. So the opening of the school there was delayed while they changed the glass at fairly high cost. And the big thing was that because the consultant never read the fire cert, and the cost of this insulated glazing didn't go into the tender. So then the builder, at last minute, I presume, charged them an absolute arm and leg to go changing the normal windows for fire-related insulated glazing. So again, these are all high-level examples of non-compliance with the fire cert. They're not just silly site errors or bad workmanship. If you came to apartment blocks, I just to give an example, I kind of broken down the main errors that I found. On one side there, you have the workmanship issues. No matter how good your fire cert is, these are things that can go wrong. Fire stopping isn't great, or somebody's punched a hole through something for a pipe, plasterboard fixings aren't right because there isn't enough screws in it, fire doors, they've holes around, So I don't want to talk about too many technical details. I want to talk about the high level concept of fire cert. So they're all workmanship issues, and they can go wrong no matter whether you get a fire cert or not. But what you wind up also getting is you get layout problems where the designer has either deviated from the fire cert, or hasn't thought about the fire cert, or forgot about the fire cert, or thought it was okay to change something, and it caused a problem. So, layout things, they put in a new layout, it now doesn't comply. Maybe they have open plan, which wasn't accounted for before, and maybe now they need sprinklers, or they've rejigged the kitchen to make the kitchen nicer and to make the hob in a better place, but they've now put the hob too close to the means of escape. The fire alarms, again, a very common one in apartment blocks. They might put the right detectors in, but then they didn't interlink to the shop downstairs, which they were required to do. Gas service pipes running through main escape corridors, when the fire cert specifically would have said don't do it. Smoke control lobbies being left out, stairways not being ventilated, lines of fire resistance, they put in 30 minutes instead of 60 minutes, or moved it to the wrong place, and it didn't, rooms that didn't work, and escape widths have been wrong. So again, these are just to give you some examples, and I kind of want to focus on the layout and the design changes. So before we go any further, what actually is a fire cert? And the aim of fire certs at day one was to ensure the design complied before you started, to hopefully things will get built right. And the effect is that the Building Control Authority certifies that the design complies with Part B. It's not an opinion, it's not an approval, it's not it'll probably be grand, it's a certificate, right? And just to take an example of, I just pulled one of the fire certs at a random, and the key wordings are in yellow. It's Cork County Council hereby certified the building will comply with the building regulations. And the big things for everybody to note, if the fire officer gets something wrong, it's granted and it's now deemed to comply. If they forget to put sprinklers in, it complies. If there's a poor wording in there, it still complies. And then the flip side for the designers and the assigned certifiers is that's the best comfort blanket assurance you're going to get. You're all hunting for ancillary certs. You're getting a certificate from the council. So be very wary about deviating from it. So again, a main point I want to make is that fire certs is not just a paper exercise. It's something to be used. So for the designer, it assures you that your design complies. If you change the design afterwards, what assurance do you have? For any assigned certifier here, you're the ones usually left carrying the can and the ones who are worried most about liability. It's the best ancillary cert you're going to get because it's a certificate from the council that it does comply. So, you know, what I would say to any assigned certifier is, did you check the fire cert? Did you look to see, does it match? Did the design drawings at the start match? Has the designer changed something? Has the builder changed something? If they did change it, does it still comply with the fire cert? And if it doesn't comply with the fire cert, who's now signing off on it? And for building control officers, it's what I would say is it's a tool to aid inspections. And I'll talk about that more later. So if the works don't comply, who's liable for the remedial costs? So in the case of that nursing home I went in, they put in the timber linings at expense because it was up really high, the cost of materials, the cost of fitting it, and then 2 days later they take it all down again. And for the school, you know, they had to put in glazing, insulated glazing, which is probably going to cost 10 grand that they hadn't budgeted for. So the builder's probably going to charge them 20 grand for that. Where does that money come from? Latent defects. You've changed something, 10 years down the line, the builder's gone because they folded the company. The developer's gone because he's folded that company. That leaves the designer and the assigned certifier. So who's going to get sued when something goes wrong? Fatal fires is all well and good until somebody loses an eye. There's building went on fire, 10 people are dead, and they're now looking for who they can pin the blame on. And at that point, if you're the assigned certifier or you're a designer, I think you'd be very delighted to say, well, look, my design complied. Look, the council said it complied. I followed the fire cert. And, you know, that's a very good comfort blanket to have. Now, again, all of this applies for disability access certs is exactly the same thing. So what makes a good fire cert on site? Then to be clear, no room for interpretation. So just to look at it, I did a little table here for if you have a bad word in your fire cert, what will happen on site. So, you know, will generally comply. So you go out on site and you think it doesn't, and the builder will go, well, this is one of the ones that generally won't. And you wind up with a panto, oh, yes, it does. Oh, no, it doesn't moment, right? And you then have to go fighting about it. Whereas if the wording was clear and concise and pinned down on the fire cert, there's no arguing. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It needs to be comprehensive to a certain level of detail. You know, we don't need to know how many screws are going into the fire door, but we do want to know that it is an FD30. And again, if it's not pinned down properly, the builders will run a mile and they'll cause trouble for building control and the designer and the assigned certifier. It needs to be correct, because if the fire officer signs off on something that wasn't correct, it's now certified as being compliant. So, I mean, I've been accused over the years in access certs of being too picky, getting people to fix sentences, getting rid of things like will generally comply or will comply where practicable. Because then you wind up inside and the builder will say, oh, well, it's not practical here. And then I think, well, actually it is. And they go, oh, no, it isn't. And you're back to panto and arguing it again. Whereas if you pin it down in the access cert or the fire cert, the argument is over. And last, you know, it needs to correspond to the DAC. There's no point in having fire cert for one layout and an access cert for a different layout. What's going to happen then? So what happens after a fire cert is granted? And this is about the best picture I could think of. If I've only seen Indiana Jones, where there's a lost ark, they just wheel the ark off into the distance and everybody hopes it'll all get forgotten. So what happens with fire certs after they're granted? Do they just get filed away and forgotten? Does anybody ever look at them ever again? And if anybody ever does look at it, do they actually understand what's in it? What was changed in it, why things were in there. So again, I'm a big fan of using fire certs. So common reasons for non-compliance with a fire cert: further revisions after the fire cert was granted. So just the example there of the box, I'd see that very often on site where there's a problem. You look at the revisions box, there's issued for planning, issued for the fire cert, revised for the fire cert, and then you have issued for tender with changes, and then amendments after the tender, and then issued for construction. There might be a few more changes. That's a fair hint that something has happened. So that kind of shows a lack of respect for the fire cert. Somebody obviously wasn't taken, happy to make a change without going back for a revised one. Another one is reverting to the original design. If they get a fire cert, they apply for a fire cert, fire officer fights over loads of issues, the fire cert rumbles on for a couple of months, changes are made, and then they go in and build what they intended, what they applied for in the first place. Or another one, maybe less serious, they missed a revision. So maybe you got a fire consultant in, he applies for the fire cert, the design you told him to apply for. Fire officer points out some things, a few changes are made. Maybe that wall is upgraded from an FD30 to an FD60, or that glazing is moved from fire-rated glazing to insulated fire-resisting glazing. And the designer gets the fire cert back, thanks very much, puts it in their pocket, files it away like the Raiders of the Lost Ark, never actually reads it and doesn't notice that the fire-resisting glazing has been upgraded. Another one is the conditions are forgotten, or disregarded. If I go to a site fire cert, the conditions are usually my first question. How are you complying with condition number 2? And then just draw a dividing line underneath. Your standard workmanship issues. Anybody can install a fire door badly, or knock a hole in the fire stopping, or forget the fire stopping. But another one is like details that are difficult to build. You might detail, look, there's going to be fire stopping over this door, but then you've put in a huge hole, and the hole is so big that they can't put in standard fire stopping. So then, predictably enough, the builder puts it in wrong. So one for the designers to watch is, if you are going to design something, can they actually build it? So I'm now going to talk about the application of fire certs for design certifiers and what design certifiers should be thinking about. So that little table there just shows the processes. So at the fire cert stage, when it's granted, it's certified by the fire officer or the local authority. But at commencement stage, the design certifier certifies the design again. Now, if they have designed it and they've kept the design in accordance with the fire cert, they now have, as per the little picture there, they have the best comfort blanket they can get, because that is an assurance that their design does comply and they don't have to worry that they get it wrong. They might have to go back and check themselves, their own Part L issues. They might have to check their own structure, but they have a guarantee, at least on the in relation to the fire and Part M, if they've gone for an access cert. So if you deviate from the design, who's now responsible for the change? You've moved, you've lost your comfort blanket because you now own the changes. And if the design, isn't adequately detailed that you gave to the builder and they don't build it right, then who's responsible for those changes? And another one is like, you've changed something, but then the assigned certifier, he's starting to think about his own liability when it comes to completion at the end. And he goes, hang on now, this doesn't comply, and he refuses to sign off on it. So even if the building control people never come in, if you've changed the design, if you've deviated from your access or your fire cert or your access cert, the assigned certifier might raise as an issue. So again, the designer should think very long and very carefully before they go deviating from the fire cert, and maybe they should pay it a bit more respect. So maybe the steps the designer should take when thinking about fire cert. So at commencement stage, review the granted fire cert. Is it the same as what was being applied for? Was there any layout changes? Because that's going to be a big thing. Did some corridors need to move? Did the stairs need to increase? Or were there any design revisions? Did the fire glazing upgrade from one type of glass to another? Did you initially propose a wall was going to be 30 minutes and now it needs to be 60 minutes? And you need to make sure that all of those changes make it into the drawings that you're submitting with the commencement notice, and ensure that the correct design goes to site. And consider the implications if you do decide afterwards you have to make any changes. So who's going to certify the changes? And are there any knock-on effects? And again, this would be a very common one where I would see problems. So just to take a simple example, there might be sprinklers specified, and they, the builder and the owner going, oh, they're awful expensive. Can we leave the sprinklers out? And you look through the guidance and think, oh, hang on, there's nothing in the guidance here about sprinklers being needed in the building. Well, if you didn't do the fire cert and you didn't look through the fire cert, maybe the sprinklers were in there in compensation for something else. So maybe the escape routes in the building were deficient, or maybe the fire risk was higher than usual, or maybe you were going for, in the fire cert it was proposed, look, we've doubled our escape routes, but we're going to give you sprinklers in compensation. And if the fire officer accepted that, in that case, you now can't go taking the sprinklers out, because it now has a knock-on effect. And the same would go for a lot of other effects. Is a revised fire cert required, or do you want one to get the comfort blanket for yourself, or are you going to take the risk of A, signing off on it, and B, maybe there might be a hold up with the completion cert. The assigned certifier might hold it up, the insurers might hold it up, or building control, if they go in, they might hold it up. So the assigned certifier, what do they have to think about, and how do they apply to fire certs? So again, I have the exact same table there. They're signing it off on completion cert stage. And the lines there, again, is an extract for the cert of compliance and completion. And what I find is a lot of assigned certifiers haven't actually read what they're signing. So again, just to read the yellow writing, just to paraphrase, based on the above, I now certify the building or works is in compliance, not substantial compliance, not appears to comply, is compliant. So again, if the building has deviated from the fire cert, to be noted from my table there, the assigned certifier is the only person who has to sign a statutory cert compliance after the commencement notice comes in. So if the design changes, who's now signing off on it? The designer signed off on the design at commencement stage, and they're not signing off on it after that. The fire officer signed off on the fire cert, and you've deviated from that, so they're off the hook. So whether they like it or not, the assigned certifier, unless they can get enough ancillary certs, are signing off on it personally. So the question I would ask them is, how good is your liability insurance? And if the owner has made the change to cut some corners, or the designer has changed something just to make the building look nicer and be more airy, they're moving liability from them to you. So do you want to sign off on it? And can you prove that you have used enough skill, care, and due diligence? So you sign off on the building, there's a fire, a lot of people are dead, and it turns out afterwards that the building wasn't built in accordance with the fire cert, and the fire alarm should have been a better spec. A very simple question the barrister, when you're in the dock, they'll ask you is, did you do diligence? Yes. Did you check the fire cert? No. Where's your defense there? So think about your liability. So what should the assigned certifier think about? And I have a lovely, the book stops here picture. At commencement stage, first check, does the certified design comply with the fire cert or not? If it doesn't, you should be asking the designer, which version are we building? And who's signing off on the changes? Because if I was the assigned certifier, I wouldn't want to, because otherwise the liability is on me. So I would ask any assigned certifiers who are watching or listening today, how often at commencement stage do you look at the fire cert? How do you know that the designer submitted the design that complies with the fire cert? Because I can tell you, very often, when I check the commencement notice that comes in, and if I look at the drawings, very often the fire cert drawings don't match the commencement notice drawings. And invariably, there are big changes. So at construction stage, if there's deviations, do I still effectively comply with the fire cert? Does it still comply with Part B? Is a new fire cert required? And it's the owner is paying for it, not you. And if a new fire cert is obtained, then you now have a comfort blanket that the new design complies. Whereas if you don't get this comfort blanket or revised fire cert, you're signing off on it. Who certifies any of the resigned design? And and I have it in different color there, 7-day notices. Invariably, the design that comes in at commencement stage isn't the final design that comes out of the fire cert stage a couple of months later. You're asking for deviations and changes to happen there. So if you're the assigned certifier, are you on the ball? Are you watching that? which version is getting built. And a completion cert stage, do uncertified revisions move the liability from the designer to the assigned certifier? Because again, the assigned certifier is the only one who has to sign a statutory certificate of compliance. And did you exercise due care, skill, and diligence? And if you wound up in court after a fatal fire, or you're being sued for $1 million for a building that's now unusable, did you check the fire cert? And if you didn't, why not? So, building control officers and fire certs. Too many building control officers don't use fire certs, and too many fire certs wind up getting filed away like Indiana Jones. So I would like to try and encourage fire officers to inspect buildings and to use fire certs. And I think that's where my expertise comes in. As I said, I have only processed one fire cert, but I've inspected hundreds of buildings with them. So why the building control officer should use it? First, the design is agreed in advance, and the drawings are better than you will get in a normal commencement notice, and there's more details so you can figure out what's going on. Next biggie is all the arguments have been made and agreed and decided and resolved. So I don't have to go back to technical guidance document B to argue paragraph 1.2.3.4 anymore. I don't have to argue clause, whatever it is, out of BS 9988. I don't have to argue whether a door needs to be 60 or 30. It's in the fire cert. So I can just say, it appears you don't comply with your fire cert. And they can either prove it to me that it's right, or they can get a revised fire cert. It makes it very easy because I can just hold up this document. You didn't do that. I don't have to argue with me anymore. Like the guy in the picture there, I'm using the fire cert as a shield. And the threat of having to get a revised fire cert, particularly for smaller problems, is a very good threat for the building control officer to encourage people to go fixing things. And because if they want to keep going on, they might then need a reg cert, and it's going to hold them up. So the approach to using fire certs at different stages, and I'm going to talk about the 4 cert stages. There's using the fire cert for building control purposes at the fire cert stage, and at commencement notice stage, and then during construction and at completion cert. So the first 2 I kind of reserve for kind of what I would call desktop inspections. You're reviewing the drawings, and the other 2 are what you're doing on site. So at fire cert application stage, so the heading I have here is raising non-fire issues at fire cert stage. I'm going to leave all the fire issues to the fire officer. So the fire officer is limited to looking at part B only, right? But there's nothing to stop me as a building control officer commenting to the parties involved about other stuff. So the layout in the fire cert, the layout frequently doesn't comply with part M. So that stairs, instead of just being a part K stairs, it now needs to be a part M accessible stairs. Stairs needs to be winders. There needs to be landings in the middle. Therefore, the whole stairs is going to have to change. So the whole area around that part of the building is going to have to change. Maybe a lift now needs to go in, whereas it wasn't covered with the fire cert. So at the fire cert stage, it's worth sorting out those problems, because when it comes to the access cert, it's going to be a problem, and then you're going to be getting back into needing a revised fire cert. So it's better to sort them out early. So as I said, while the fire officer can only look at the part B stuff, there's nothing to stop me commenting on it. So, and my view is the earlier you sort out issues, the better. If you point out a major blooper, the designer is usually happy to fix stuff on paper. Whereas if the stairs is already built and in concrete, you're going to have an argument about everything. Heads off problems before the DAC is submitted. So no, you're not going to wind up with 2 different layouts, and you might avoid the need to get a revised fire cert. So building control input during the fire cert. Contentious fire certs, what I find on these is if there is a major Barney in the fire cert and there's major arguments about everything, they are the ones I find that they don't build in accordance with the fire cert. They go in, they build what they wanted to in the first place. So if there's a really contentious fire cert, the fire officer will tell me, and they get moved right up the risk analysis for inspection. Contentious elements, if there's an argument about whether the glazing needs to be fire resisting or fire resisting insulated, again, these are the things that they often won't bother doing on site, or they'll forget to do on site. So again, that will move up my list of things to keep an eye on. If there's significant revisions needed and changes to the layout of the design, again, my view is that, normally when that comes to site, all those revisions are forgotten about. And then non-compliance with Part M issues, you're going to have major layout changes. You may as well sort them out now. And contentious fire certs for me get prioritized for inspections, and particularly for access certs, which I would do more of. If there is something contentious in the fire cert or the access cert, maybe it's worth putting a condition on just to pin that down. What I would use this a lot on is in schools. I have found that they always put entry control systems at the front door, and they always don't comply. So I always put a condition on, big schools. I put a condition on conditioning that the entry control systems will comply. So then when it doesn't comply, I can go, look, why didn't you comply with condition 4? And I now don't have to go reopening technical guidance document then paragraph 1.5.7, whatever. I don't have to argue about how far the entry control should be from the door. It's been conditioned. I knew it was going to be a problem, so I added the condition in advance so that it would make it easier for me to enforce later on. So raising non-fire issues at the fire cert stage, as you would have said, warn you we did, listen, you didn't. So for all of these things where, if I have conditioned something or if I have told them at far earlier stage that something was going to be a problem, if they then didn't do it, I am more than happy to go, well, I told you. And it puts the designer and the design certifier and the builder on the back foot, all their arguments, but it'll cost us some loads of money to fix it. Well, I told you, why didn't you do it? And at that point, they can go fighting amongst the three of them, like who's responsible for it. They're not arguing with me anymore. So as for raising issues, so if you spot an issue at the fire cert stage with your building control hat on, you can raise it with the fire consultant. Now, the fire consultant mightn't be the designer as well. They might just be dragged in for the job, so they mightn't be allowed to change it. But, maybe they can coordinate with the DAC so that the two layouts do match and that the stairs can get changed. But if they can't, then maybe they need to tell the client. So if the fire consultant can't or won't fix something, a non-Part B issue, they remind the fire officer that you can only look at Part B, then I write to the owner. And tell them that, look, you're getting your fire cert, but there's a problem. You're going to have to change it. You're going to need a revised fire cert. So do you want to continue with this application or do you want to get a revised one? And if they do need to get a revised one afterwards, again, I did tell you. But what you find generally is if you do point it out early to them, they then change it. So then the problem doesn't make it to site, and then it isn't a problem on site. So here's just an example of a sample letter I would send out. So if a fire cert is in, there's a problem with it, and the fire officer might point it out to me, or maybe I have the access cert and tell them. So again, this is just a paragraph out of a letter that the main body of the letter would have we request the information under section 11.3 and all the other legalese. So this is just a paragraph. So just as an example, so it appears that the development requires an access cert under Part 3B of the regs. It appears one hasn't been submitted. Further to review the documents submitted with the fire cert, it appears that elements of design may not comply with Part M. In particular, and then I'm just highlighting the issues. So like the size of the lobby isn't right, the open risers to the stairs are a trip hazard, and you've left out the passenger lift. Please provide details of when you're going to, please provide details of how you're going to comply with Part 3B disability access certs. And when are you going to submit the access cert? Let me know. And then I give them the reminder. And it's always good to put, allude to the word money because that gets people's attention. In order to reduce the risk of costly remedial measures, it's strongly advised that you, get your ass in gear and get your access cert in and sort it out now. And all work's done in the absence of an access cert done, so at your own risk. That usually encourages people to get things in very fast. I sent one of these once from home. I was working from home that morning, and then I cycled into the office. And by the time I got to the office, I had a response. I was like 35 minutes later. And the key thing is to write to the owner, because they're the one who's paying for everything. No, I write to everybody, and then they can fight it up between themselves. I don't know whose fault it is. It might be the designer's fault, it might be the owner's fault. But if you write to everybody, they can sort it out themselves. So using fire certs at commencement stage, particularly on 7-day notices, because they're always a disaster. So my view is it's better to sort out problems early. If you tell them before they've it built, it's much easier to get them fixed. And a good risk analysis helps with that. So here's just an extract of the risk analysis we run. Twice a month, I would export all the data out of BCMS for the commencement notices, run them into Excel, and it kind of comes out something like this. And I can then filter it for commercial buildings or office buildings or whatever I want. And I can see exactly what's come in, and then I can pick what I'm going to inspect. And if I had reviewed it at commencement notice, or if I'd reviewed it during fire cert stage, I would then know, but hang on, this one's going to be a problem because there was a major fight about the stairways, and they get moved right up the list of inspections. Or I might just open the drawings to check, did they put that new stairway in like they promised? So again, this is a sample letter we might have sent, and it's just a paragraph. And as I said, the cover letter would cover all the requests for info and all that sort of thing. But just as an example, so it appears that the drawings submitted with the commencement notice do not correspond with the design for which the fire cert was granted and may not be in compliance with Part B. In particular, the following areas of concern were noted: omission of the proposed smoke control lobbies to the stairways, wholesale changes to the first floor staff layout area, subdivision of the classroom, creating inner rooms which are not described in the fire cert. Please tell me how you're going to comply with Part B, or how you're going to comply with your fire cert. Again, I'm just kind of throwing the problem at them there. I'm telling them that there's a major problem. They haven't done it wrong yet, so they now have an opportunity to fix it. And if they don't fix it, I can go back later and say, well, look, I told you that you needed to have the lobbies. You knew, because you proposed it in your first cert. It's not my fault that you've now left them out, and it's not my fault that your job has been delayed for 9 months. And the owner can then start fighting with the designer and the builder over that. Why didn't they go in? So 7-day notices, again, are a particular problem, partly because the design, very often the design that comes in at 7-day notice stage does not comply with Part B, not to mind Part M. So the question to be asked is, how much is built before the fire cert is eventually granted? It might be 4 months before the fire cert is granted, and at that stage, the stairs that the fire officer has been fighting about are already built. And then the problem is, are you going to get the builder to change them back or not? Or, are they going to work with the original design? And again, just a reminder for the assigned certifier, he's got to sign off on it at the end. The design has changed. Is the assigned certifier taking enough notice of the 7-day notice process? And for Part M, if they didn't comply with Part B in the 7-day notice, then they definitely didn't comply with Part M, because the access cert hasn't gone in yet. Layout changes are often required. The toilets might have forgotten, corridors are going to need to move, turning spaces are going to go in, extra toilets which are going to move things around, the stairs might need to get bigger, a lift might need to go in, and they're all going to have massive knock-on layout effects for the fire cert, and you're then getting back into a revised fire cert. So again, is the assigned certifier aware of the changes that are going on? Because they've got to sign off on it. So again, just a sample raising letters at the 7-day notice stage. So it appears that the design submitted with the 7-day notice does not come. Now, this letter would be for 7-day notice has been in for a few weeks, and maybe the fire officer has made a few changes. So it appears the design submitted with the 7-day notice does not correspond to the design currently submitted with the fire cert. Please provide copies of the 4 construction drawings. So which design are you building? Are you building the design ones? Are you building the commencement notice drawings, or are you going to build the current fire cert ones? And again, this letter goes to the owner, the designer, the builder, and the assigned certifier. So now the assigned certifier knows that the design has changed and there's a problem, and the designer knows that maybe the designer isn't the fire consultant, and they know the changes are being made, so they are now on notice. So just in this, look, these drawings should be fully dimensioned, and I've now highlighted, I've sneakily highlighted, give me the details of your proposed smoke lobby, because they're left out of your commencement notice drawings. Give me the layout of the staff area on the first floor that I've noticed doesn't comply with your fire cert. Which version are you going to build? And give me the layout of the classrooms, including any subdivision. So I'm flagging all of the problems for them early. And what I would hope at that stage is that the assigned certifier and the designer are going, oh, this is a problem, let's fix it now, rather than later. So, and I would also put in a gentle, maybe not so gentle reminder, which is under, sorry, could somebody close the door there, please? So under Article F4, a certificate of compliance and completion will not be validated until such time as all requests for information and statutory processes, including the first cert and next cert, have been satisfactorily concluded. So that's putting them on warning. I've told you there's a problem. If you don't sort it out, you're not getting your completion cert off of us until you sort it. So please sort it out now. And again, I'm reminding them, until you get your cert of compliance and completion, which we're not going to give you, you can't open the building. So use of the fire cert then during construction. So maybe you didn't review it at an earlier stage, or maybe you did. So any building control officer who's thinking about doing an inspection of a commercial building. So a couple of steps that I would always take. First, review the granted fire cert. It's there for you. You may as well use it. It's going to make your life an awful lot easier. So do the fire cert drawings match the commencement notice drawings? Try to identify, any deviations from the two. Identify likely problems which you're going to pick up from experience. And if you do identify problems, consult the fire officer. Now, it's very easy for me because I'm in the fire department, and the guy who did the fire cert, is probably 4 or 5 desks away from me. But if you're in a split, maybe you're in planning and they're in the fire officer, maybe you need to build these relationships so you can talk to them, because they've done the fire cert. There's complicated stuff in there. I don't want to have to go re-reviewing it. So if the fire officers put stuff in, talk to them, ask them, why did you put sprinklers in? So some of the questions I would ask is, what were the main arguments in the fire cert? Because that gives me a heads up on what the builder isn't going to do. Ask for the main points to watch. Maybe there were the contentious issues in the fire cert. The fire officer knows what they are. So maybe they'll tell you, so there was a huge issue over the smoke control. It's really important. Make sure you check that for me, please. Okay, I will. Review the conditions, because again, they were put in for an important reason. So did the consultant did they take account of them? So again, one of my very common questions at an inspection, hopefully at an earlier stage, is how are you going to comply with condition number 4 to put in smoke control or something, and the next question is, do the deviations from the fire cert warrant a revised fire cert? And I will always defer to the fire officer on that one. They did the fire cert, it's effectively their building. I will let them make the decision. Is the change material? Does it really matter? Did they change it? Yeah, it's a bit different, but it still complies with Part B. Maybe we could go with that. I suppose the starting point is, if it doesn't comply with Part B, then we're definitely not going to accept it. Whereas, like you were talking earlier about the doors there, look, if the fire cert said the door was going to be a meter and it showed double doors and he puts in a meter door, let the fire officer make a decision. Are you happy just for me to work with that? Yes or no? Each building you'll have to make your own decision, debate with the fire officer, maybe let them make the decision. So I can't give you a straight answer on that, but I suppose the starting point is, if it doesn't comply with Part B, and then the starting point is, then we're not accepting it. And if you don't like our decision, apply for a revised fire cert to cover it. But I can tell you now that the fire officer who's going to be doing it is going to say no. But you can try applying if you want. Maybe you've made some argument in there that we didn't think about. Maybe you might change something else to compensate for it. But if you want to deviate, get a new fire cert. So where non-compliances arise on site, the advantage of using the fire cert is I don't have to re-argue Part B anymore. I don't have to open up technical guidance. I don't have to understand the British standard. Like, I do building control. I cover all the building regulations A to M. I'm pretty good at them. I would say I'm very good at Part M. I couldn't possibly be as good as, say, Sarah there at fire stuff, because I'm not doing fire cert. So it's not for me to reopen that can of worms. But again, the advantages first is I don't have to open that can of worms, because it's already been argued out, it's already been decided, and it's already been agreed. So discuss it with the fire cert. And if you are raising a point, argue compliance with the fire cert. Don't argue compliance with Part B, or don't argue compliance with the British standard, because that argument is being made and it's been resolved. And then, if I do raise an issue at that stage, I again, getting back to Yoda, I got if I told you at commencement notice stage that there's a problem, And 9 months later, I'm out on site. That's still a problem. We told you. And that, for apart from anything else, that puts the designer on the back foot. That, look, you were told it was wrong. Why didn't you fix it? Not my fault anymore. And they can't, it's much less easy for them to sob story you into it. The guide, I'd one last week. I was in a school. There was a ceiling that should have been fire resisting, and it didn't go in fire resisting because they missed that change in the fire cert. And the designer and the builder were trying to give me the bail book that, look, this wasn't priced for in the tender. It's going to cost the school loads of money. And I can feel their sympathy, and the school's got a tight budget. But look, I told you, if you'd acted on it when I told you, you would have put it into the tender. It wouldn't have come up as a problem now, and it would have been priced right. Wouldn't be arguing with me about money anymore. So the big thing, what I would say to building control officers is do inspections with fire certs, take it with you, know what's in it, and use that as your shield to do your enforcement. It makes it far, far easier. Like if you go and do an inspection in a house, you've got to argue about the heights of windows and what paragraph, whatever it says. Whereas with, if the building has been fire certed, if it says the wall should be 60 minutes, then why isn't it 60 minutes? I've kind of gone back to this slide again. I had it earlier. So the building control officer requirements for an enforceable fire cert. It needs to be clear. Don't leave room for interpretation, because if it's not very clear in the fire cert, or if it's not very clear in the access cert, you then can't argue that they didn't comply with the fire cert. So then maybe have to go back to arguing what the technical guidance of the British standard says. And it's not that it's not enforceable anymore. It's just it's no harder for you. Whereas if the fire cert was clear, if it didn't have the word generally or should in there that they can go start arguing about, then it just makes it much easier. No, and for the assigned certifiers and the designers listening, it also applies to them, because if the design isn't very clear and the builder goes off on a tangent and does something else, and the designer says to the builder, hang on, that's not right, the builder will argue, well, look, it wasn't clear. I went and did my thing. If you want me to change it, I'm going to charge you for it. So again, just some sample letters that we would send. And again, these are just extracts from the main body of it. So just on the fire cert. So it appeared on site that the layout and construction of the stairwells at podium level were not being constructed in the fire cert. So again, I'm not arguing about what should and shouldn't be there. I'm saying you didn't do what it said in the fire cert. So in particular, it appeared that the stairway rising from the basement car park was not separated from the stairwell serving the upper floors by one fire resisting construction as proposed in the fire cert. No. Again, I put the word proposing cunningly because it's you proposed a 1 hour fire rated construction. How come you've forgotten to put in 1 hour fire rated construction? And just as another example, it appeared on site that the doors between the atrium and the stairway were not 1 hour fire doors as proposed in the fire cert. So I don't have to argue whether the door should be an hour or not. It said an hour in the fire cert. That argument's been made. Why didn't you put an hour in? Again, it just makes enforcement an awful lot easier. And even if I'm not the world's greatest expert on what's in Part B or BS 999, I can just hold up the fire cert as my shield. So at completion cert stage, again, hopefully you've picked out all the problems up at everything. So all I'm going to say is here, I've given them the reminder all along that, look, I've raised these issues. If you haven't sorted them out, if you haven't sorted out your fire cert, if you haven't got a revised fire cert, if you needed it, I'm not going to give you your completion cert until it's sorted out. And in which case you then can't occupy it. And again, this is the importance of sending all the letters to the owner, the builder, designer. So if you just sent the letter to the builder or you just sent it to the designer, maybe the whole problem was the designer's fault and they didn't want to admit it, and all comes to enforcement and the building can't open, and then the owner's hearing about the problem for the first time. It's, number one, is unfair on them. Number two, it goes to court and the judge will give out to you for not telling them. And the owner is the only person you can serve the enforcement notice on is the owner. So if you didn't tell them from the start, then you're going to have trouble enforcing against them. But also, if you tell them at the start, look, here's a problem that's going to cost you loads and loads of money, they're likely to tell the builder to fix it. So by writing to everybody, whoever's at blame, the other people are going to force them to fix it. So just conclusion, Regarding fire certs are not a paper exercise and shouldn't be hidden away like Indiana Jones. They should be respected, and they're not a paper exercise, and they should be used. Compliance is in everybody's interest. The designer and the assigned certifier should respect fire certs a bit more. They should pay attention to them. They shouldn't be so quick to deviate from them, because they're losing their comfort blanket of assurance that it complies, and particularly the assigned certifier, because as I said, they are assigning a statutory cert of compliance that it complies. And if the design has changed since commencement stage, then they're the ones carrying the can. And will the ancillary certs that they get be good enough? And that's the last, the fire cert can assist enforcement. And I suppose one maybe I should have put there is inspecting commercial buildings is far more interesting than doing one-off houses or even housing estates. So if you haven't done them, I would encourage you to inspect them and use the fire cert. And if you're afraid of doing a big commercial building because you're daunted that this is going to be too hard and maybe I don't know enough about it, you can use the fire cert and use the access cert to make your inspections very simple. And that's it. That's all I had to say.